All right, well, welcome. Excited to train everyone today on developing your professional CV. And whether you have a CV or looking to actually start one, you're looking at next opportunities. I'm very excited to take you through some of these structures today and really helping you think through some of your experience and how it relates to this type of document. So a few things that we'll cover today is looking at what is a CV, how does that compare to a resume, the differences between the two. We're going to spend the majority of our time today looking at CV content and some of the different sections that you can actually have on a CV. And then we're also going to wrap up talking about format and style and just some considerations as you are fine-tuning your CV before you submit it to an opportunity. So let's briefly look at the differences. So some of you may have a traditional resume, which is 1 or 2 pages at top. There's no such thing as a 3-page resume. You're only going to have 1 or 2 pages, and a lot of times those things are very specific to a role. So, for instance, if you are going to work in student affairs, you're going to have a 1 or 2 page resume that's very specific on how you're working with students in a student affairs capacity. It's going to be very focused on relevant experience, recent experience, your skill sets, maybe some complementary things outside of education that also relate to that job, working with students. And again, this a resume is usually used in fields outside of academia. It can be used with staff roles on campus and sometimes hourly SHRA roles on campus, those types of positions. But usually they are used outside of kind of this academic, research, scientific fields that we see a lot with CVs. Now, CVs are different. CVs do not have a page limit. And so, for instance, I have seen academic professionals or research professionals who have 50, 60, sometimes 70-page CVs that have just this breadth of detail from their entire experience working in their field. And that's exactly what a CV is. It's a comprehensive history of a professional or your academic life. And so when you think about this, there are certain guidelines within a CV that are a little bit more focused on education and research and teaching experience, publications, things like that, that are a little bit more geared towards the scientific fields, higher education fields, and sometimes healthcare fields, depending on which direction you want to go in. So when you are thinking about applying to a particular position, sometimes they might use this terminology interchangeably. You might see a job posting say, submit your resume or CV. And in that case, you have to figure out which one's most appropriate for that type of position. So, for instance, if you are applying to, let's say, a local tech startup, and you're doing more technology related aspects in the job, that's going to be usually a 1 page, probably not even a 2 page resume, just because the tech world is very geared towards more of a 1 page resume. But let's say you are looking at a faculty role teaching technology in a local college. That's where you're going to actually submit your CV, talking about your teaching experience, your research, all of these things regarding your ability to train students in more of an academic setting. So you do have to really read the fine print on some job descriptions to make sure you understand which one is correct. And it's okay also to reach out to the department to make sure that you're submitting the correct documents. One thing that you'll also notice is if you ever look at international careers, the term CV is really used internationally in the same way resume is used domestically. So if you were to apply, anywhere in Europe or Africa or Asia, you're going to see that term CV used very interchangeably to resume. And so also know that you have to think about outside. A company in England, for instance, is probably not looking for a 40-page actual CV the way we think about CV. They're thinking still that 1 or 2 page resume. So again, just read the fine print and always reach out if you have questions around that. All right, so when you're thinking about this, you are going to use a CV in a multitude of ways. There's so many different reasons why it's helpful to have this type of document. Obviously, if you are looking at faculty positions or instructor or adjunct positions, research positions in the university, even in industry outside of higher ed, a lot of research positions also really appreciate a CV to be able to see that breadth of experience that you have. It could be that you are in a position where you're looking at postdoc opportunities, possibly fellowships or some type of funding or awards. I use my CV a lot when I am applying to conferences to present, publicly at those conferences. It could be non-research science positions. It's like communication or data or consulting. And then some, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes positions outside of the US will use this terminology as well. But there are a lot of different ways that you might use this type of document versus just a typical resume. So let me just give you a quick just look at this. So we're going to use the field of biology today in some of my examples just to give you an idea. But this is an undergraduate, a typical resume for someone coming out of their degree, looking at research experience. But when you think about resumes, this is a brief summary. Okay, this is not an extensive look at everything you've ever done, but it's a brief summary of your education, experiences, skill sets. And what's so key about resumes is that it really has to be tailored to the position to such a degree now because of all of the AI that's being used to scan these resumes. And so when we are really thinking about using a resume to apply for a job, you have to make sure that keywords are included, bullet points, are actively lined up, things are very strategically bolded. There's a lot to think about now because of the AI behind a lot of human resource offices. But when you think about this, there are some instances where you would want to use this particular resume for more staff-related higher ed roles or non-education industry roles and also private sector roles. So there may be opportunities if you are looking to move around or move up that you may not need a traditional CV as we'll talk about today, but it may just mean you need a 1 or 2 page resume. And again, you're always welcome to reach out and we can chat about that. All right, so let's talk about CVs. So CVs, as I've mentioned, is a comprehensive record of your education, your academic experience. It's also like a resume used as a professional branding tool, but much more focused on your academic, your research, types of experiences. And again, a lot of times the health sectors and some scientific sectors will also use a CV. And again, like I've mentioned, there is no page limit. And you can see that the styles are a little bit similar. And then these are some of the headers that we're going to talk about today, some of the different sections that might be a little bit different than a traditional resume. These sections are not all inclusive. There are other sections potentially you could add based on your experience and expertise. But these are typical sections on a CV that we'll talk about today. And I'm going to show you the format of each of these sections. But take a quick look at these bulleted points. And then I'm going to ask you a question on the next slide, but take a quick look at what these include. All right, hopefully everyone had a nice quick glance at that. So when you think about all those different section headers, which of these common CV headings and sections best align with your experience? Let's talk about this in the chat a little bit. What are some of those that really stood out to you? Was it the teaching experience or research, or maybe you enjoy going to presentations or doing presentations at conferences, kind of like I do? Put some ideas in the chat. What are some of those sections that really align with your areas of experience that you would want to showcase on a CV? Yeah, teaching for sure. Lots of teaching coming up. Yes, and service experience. Excellent. Publications, absolutely. Research, great. Yeah, community engagement, fantastic. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing that. All right, so let's talk about some CV tips. So you always want to have realistic expectations. I mentioned earlier that I've seen some CVs, 50, 60, 70 pages sometimes for, experts in the field, faculty who've been working, a long time and have lots of experience. There's never a reason to compare your CV with other people. My current CV is 7 pages. I'm very happy with that right now. That kind of showcases the number of years I've been working in this field, the types of things I've been doing, the accomplishments I have. I love it when I see faculty who have 30, 40 page CVs, but try not to compare yourself to others. Just because someone has a longer CV doesn't necessarily mean that they're always more qualified to do a job per se, but it's just showcasing your overall lived experience. So Try to just really be proud of the CV that you have and just set up realistic expectations for yourself. Again, when you're thinking about your CV, think broadly about your experience. Not just research that maybe you did in your full-time role, but think about research you did during your graduate work, even research outside of your role or graduate work. Maybe you're doing some independent research. Think about teaching experience that you've had even back when you were, again, in graduate school, teaching, maybe you're even doing outside of the university setting. Oops. Think about any publications, even those that are not yet published. Maybe they're in progress. Maybe you're about to ready to submit them, but that's perfectly fine. Presentations, again, that have not yet been accepted, but you have prepared them, you have proposed them, and you are looking at that regional or national exposure for some of the expertise that you would like to share. So really think broadly about experience. If you have areas of expertise that you think it would be helpful for an employer to know, let's find a place for it on the CV in a particular section. And then finally, grants and awards, again, including conference and even travel awards that you might get over the years when you're doing that type of experience. All right, let me show you a couple of the styles of CVs, and then we'll dive into some of these sections. This is a very classic CV that's been around for decades. I do see more seasoned faculty having this style just because they've had this style for many years. But you can see it usually, starts with the common header at the top where it says curriculum vitae. You have kind of a lengthy heading of all of the contact information, sometimes the office address. You have the education. You have the dates, usually in this particular style on the left. And then a lot of times faculty will not put a lot of description under their roles, whether it be research, teaching, et cetera, leadership, things like that. There's nothing wrong with this style. Okay, it's been around for decades. There's nothing wrong with it. However, in this day and age, when there's so much competition for different positions, I encourage you to consider a more modern approach to your CV, just so that the reader has a little bit more information. And when we think about the modern CV, this is a little bit more in line with what a resume looks like. But in general, it's just a little bit easier to read and provides a little bit more explanation around what you have accomplished instead of more of a simplified list of all of your accomplishments. So you can see how this has a little bit briefer of a heading. The dates in our estimation are really not that important when you think about the value of your title, the organizations you're working for. We are a civilization in America that reads left to right. And so you have to think about, if we're reading left to right, what are the most important things? Those things need to be on the left. And in this case, dates are really not that important. They're important, but they're not the most important thing. So putting them on the right is helpful. Putting, city and state on the right, that's helpful. But then also thinking about how can I showcase what I've experienced and accomplished in each of these roles with bullet points very similar to a resume. And so as I go through these different examples, I'm going to be using more of this modern CV approach because right now even AI is scanning CVs for these more academic science and healthcare positions. And I just want to make sure that all of you have enough substance within your documents for an actual person to get your CV after it goes through some of this AI. So the very first section on your CV needs to be this contact information. And very similar to a resume, some of these same rules apply. Make sure that your name is the biggest on the document. Make sure you have your city and state. And at this point, it's okay not to list your entire address, but just the city and state for privacy and just security purposes. If obviously they will contact you after the interview when they get to the background check component of things, and they may ask for official addresses and things at that point. But in the initial send on a CV, you don't have to put your full address. Make sure you put the phone number that you will want to receive a call from. So for instance, I have an office phone number, but I probably am not going to put that on a CV because I may not be present to answer that type of call if an employer were to call. So make sure in this case it's your cell phone, or if you still have a home phone, whichever one you want to answer in a professional way. Make sure you have a professional email address. And this can get a little funky when faculty have like a school address, which one to use. Do I use my UNC Charlotte email address or do I use my personal? Usually there's not a fast rule on this, but for instance, if you are wanting more internal movement on a job, I would say use your charlotte.edu email address on your CV. But if you are wanting to go outside of UNC Charlotte, I would use your personal email address for that. Again, because we're not trying to brand ourselves just for Charlotte, we're trying to use that personal branding component for your personal email address. And then any LinkedIn or professional online portfolio that you may have, it could be that you have like a faculty website or a research website you want to showcase, but you also have those social media like LinkedIn kind of platforms. Make sure that those are in that header as well. All right, the second header, okay, usually in a CV is your educational background. And this will be all of your academic degrees, not high school degrees, but everything bachelor and above. And so within this, you'll want your full degree title. And again, because of AI, because of the age that we're in, never abbreviate anything. So, I used to have PhD on my CV, but now I spell everything out because an AI system is just not as smart as a human right now. So make sure you spell everything out. Applicant tracking systems in general cannot read acronyms. And so, like an MA and a BS and that kind of thing, they're just not understood by applicant tracking systems. So, spell everything out. So, have the degree name, have the school's entire name, as well as the city and the state. You do not need to put the range that you were in that degree. You just need to put your actual graduation date, the month, and the year. And then underneath that, if you do have some type of research within that degree that you accomplished, whether it be a thesis or dissertation, that's where you would actually put the title of your dissertation. And then followed by that, you'll actually have whoever your academic leadership was on that project. So in this case, in the example, a dissertation chair or a thesis advisor would be that key person. It's not normal per se to have the entire committee on here, but there's nothing wrong with that as well if you wanted to list several people on the committee, but usually it's just the main contact on that particular list. And partially, as I'll talk about later, this will go back to your reference sheet that will be at the end of at the end of your CV. And sometimes individuals reviewing your CV can make the connection between a reference and someone in this case who was like a department chair or advisor for a thesis. Make sure that in every section, and I'll say this over and over and over again, but make sure in each section, like in your education section, that everything's in reverse chronological order. So your newest degree down through the oldest. So for instance, if your master's is the highest level degree, then your master's will be at the top, then your bachelor's, and if you have an associate's, those will be down further below. All right, so teaching experience does not necessarily come next. I'm just going to show you we're just going through all the different sections, but when you're looking at different job descriptions, that's where you get to determine what actually does come next. So for instance, if you're looking at more of a administrative role, if you're looking at, leading a department, you probably won't have teaching experience next. You're probably going to have more administrative or leadership experience next. If you are going to go for more of a research role, you may have research experience next. So these are just the different topic areas that we'll go through. And then we have to then at the end think about kind of the structure of the whole document. But teaching experience, I've seen this very often, very minimal on individual CVs. I usually see, these are the 5 classes I typically teach, the semesters that I teach them. But again, I'm missing a lot of depth about what you're actually doing in those courses. So I encourage you, because you have no page limit on this, to really go more in depth about each of these classes that you do typically teach. So the academic title, the department that you work in here at UNC Charlotte, again, city, state, date range, all of those things, but then a bulleted list of accomplishments about what you're actually doing within that role. And it is okay to list, I teach biology 3210, or English 4500. That's fine, but always list the actual name of the course, because most other schools or employers have no idea what that acronym actually means. Again, you can list as much teaching experience as you want on a CV, going all the way back to your graduate work. If you were a TA or an RA, all of that experience is valid. Very similar to research experience. So if you are doing partial research, or if that's your full role as a researcher, again, academic title of your research position, school name and department name, the school city and the state, and then that date range that you were in that particular role. And then again, lots of detail, that bulleted list of accomplishments. What are you accomplishing within the department doing research? And you actually can divide this up by project as well if you would prefer to do it that way. But again, think about really giving some good detail around the research and the project development that you are doing. One kind of, and I don't have the structure on this slide, but one structure that can be very helpful is thinking about what is the concept of your research, what is the process that you go through to establish that research, and then what is the final result of that research, okay, if there are final results already published. So kind of think about that as a standard format to writing some of these details within a bullet point. Okay, some of you mentioned in the chat, and I love how you brought this up, but academic service. So it could be that you're on committees or trainings. There's so many different ways that we can be engaged on a college campus. And so really think about how have you been engaged outside of just your main work role. You can see some of the examples over here. Maybe you did serve as a chair or a member of a curriculum committee, or maybe you were on another faculty hiring or a staff hiring committee. Maybe you are leading, new undergraduate programs or developing new minors. You might be mentoring other faculty in your area of expertise, or organizing departmental learning seminars. You can see all of these different ways. So if you think about all the different hats that you wear in your role, where can we place some of those amazing accomplishments? And a lot of times in this academic service category, that's the most appropriate place. It just depends on what you're doing, but definitely think about how can I highlight some of these extracurricular things that I'm doing that are really important and showcase your ability to be so loyal and dedicated to the department that you work in. All right, another thing that's very, very different than a resume is that on a resume, for instance, we do not ask for an individual's interests. Interests do not really indicate on a resume anyone's competency to do something, but that is different on a CV. It's very helpful, especially if you're going for more of an academic position, to actually list your teaching interests and your research interests, because that guides the committee to know kind of the position they would want you to be in their particular department, what classes you would be best suited for, what research projects you would be best suited for based on your areas of interest. And a lot of times faculty and staff, they will have somewhat of a background in some of their areas of interest. It usually is not just a hypothetical, topic that they've never engaged with. Usually it's something that they've dabbled in or maybe started doing some research on. But again, with this particular category, you do want to think about the position that you are being recruited for. So in this case, you don't want to be so niche that a committee would look at this and go, wow, that's not at all what we're hiring for, so we're going to pass by this person. You do want to specify and tailor as much as you can to the position that you're actually applying to. So there is kind of a balance between tailoring it to the position, but also providing some really innovative ideas of some of those independent things you might really want to do if given the opportunity. All right, I mentioned conferences earlier. I know many of you are involved with going to conferences, presenting at conferences, maybe being on conference committees. But this particular is just when you go to a conference. If you're just going for learning's sake, I definitely encourage you to have, a list of the different conferences and other types of professional development that you're engaged with, whether it be webinars or even things like we're doing today, these lunch and learns. But think about the conference, what the name of the conference was, the location of the conference, whether it was in person or virtual, the month and the year. And then if you did have a participation role, like if you were on a committee, or you held a leadership position or something, feel free to add that additional information. And again, like everything else, reverse chronological order, so those newest to the oldest. And I'm going to show you a different place where we're going to put presentations, but this is literally just listing. These are all of the different conferences that I've attended, in my experience working in my professional role. And then other sections that you might be engaged with, depending on your role, are showcasing different honors that you've achieved. You can see some of the awards on the left-hand side, the name of the award itself, where that award came from, the date that you received that award, and then just a little bit of information about what that award entailed. If you have information around how many submissions, for instance, maybe 300 people submitted for the award and you were one of 10 to get it. That kind of information can be really helpful for a search committee. But any information about the award itself, you can keep it short, but any details are super helpful just to showcase the magnitude of the award itself. On the right-hand side, you'll see research grants. Some of you are definitely involved in grant writing and being able to get money for your departments. So again, just being able to provide a little bit more detail around what did that entail, how much funding was actually awarded after the grant came through, what was the duration of the grant, all of those great details. And then honors is it's a little bit more broad. So this could be in your associates or bachelor's, master's, doctorate, lots of different levels. But thinking about, your GPA, thinking about if you graduated cum laude, cum laude, sorry, cum laude's, magna cum laude, and summa cum laude, dean's list, chancellor's list, all of those things. Feel free to put some of those honors and awards on your CV as well. All right. Publications. So especially for those of you doing lots of research, I would assume you have some of these. So I would really think about how to format these. Again, you could use publications that are current. You are in the process of submitting them for publication. Those can definitely go on a CV, but also the ones that have been published. The key to this is setting it up very similar, kind of similar to a reference sheet. As you would in the back of a research paper. But in this case, you're going to set it up by date. And thinking about, what your role was in this particular research publication, it's okay to even bold your name if you want to within that listing. And then you're literally going to set it up in your APA, MLA, or Chicago style format, but then just make sure everything is, again, reverse chronological order. So those newest publications down to the oldest. And then very similar. So whether you're doing, presentations at conferences or, professionally on campus or wherever the case may be in the community, make sure that, again, you're setting up your presentations in that APA, MLA, or Chicago format, again, by date in reverse chronological order. So again, style changes. I've had to change some of my presentations over the years just because APA switched around a little bit. Just dates changed and things. So just make sure that you're keeping up kind of with those formats, but hopefully they won't switch too much. And then also professional affiliations. So if you're part of, different societies or associations nationally or statewide or whatever the case may be, it's really great to showcase not only their name and the date range that you've been part of this, but again, if you do have actual roles being on a committee or a leader in that affiliated, degree of some sort, that would be great to actually put that if you're like a vice president or treasurer or whatever the case. But definitely show the date range. And in my case, for instance, I was part of an association for a few years and then I fell off and then I came back on. It's okay to showcase different time frames as well. You don't have to literally put, for the past 30 years, I've been on this affiliation, but maybe I dropped off every couple of years. So it's okay to put multiple time frames within this, but again, just a really great list just to showcase your expertise and how you're being engaged outside of your full-time degree. Sorry, your full-time job. And then skills. This is a very minor section. This could be extremely huge depending on your area of expertise. Skills in general are focused more on these technical, language, tactical skills. This is not where we put what we consider career skills or career competencies, leadership, teamwork, ability to communicate, those kinds of things. This is a chance for you really to showcase those technical and hard skills. So it's being able to list all of the different languages that you speak, whether it's fluent or proficient. For those of you who might be in a language, you could say, I am fluent in, 4 different languages and I want to teach in the language department. That's where you'd want to showcase that. A lot of our roles in higher ed, they do revolve around technology or educational technology. So being able to list those things. Outside of that, you might find skill sections such as using different types of machinery. If like you're running a machine lab, it could be that you're in charge of marketing for your department, and so you need to add your social media platforms that might be, utilized in that role. But again, just think more of those hard technical skills, language skills would go in this type of section, and usually it does go further down the page. When you're thinking about CV and where this might go, it does go further down because you have so many other things that kind of overtake this particular section, all of your experience. But definitely is a relevant section for sure, especially if the job description itself notes that they're looking for these very particular skills. So definitely make note of that. All right, and a few of you in the chat mentioned community service. A lot of times, obviously UNC Charlotte values community service. They give us time during the year to go volunteer in the community and be engaged. But a lot of times when you're looking at those faculty and more academic roles, you are looking for individuals who have servant leadership. And being able to showcase those places where you're volunteering regularly or once in a while is super helpful. And again, these could be local nonprofits. It could be other types of maybe very specific to your industry or topic area. You might be, volunteering in the community for something like that. You might be a guest speaker. There's so many different ways. I'm sure you all are engaged, but just making sure that those are listed again, reverse chronological order on your document. Just showcasing how you're engaged and all of the amazing outreach that you're doing to our community. And then finally, again, this is something very different than on a resume. On a resume, there are no references, but on a CV, they are at the very end of the document. And these are some things that you want to make sure that you have within that reference sheet. So you want to make sure you have the reference's name, their role in the department, their actual official title, the department's name, the university's name, the department's full address, the phone number for that individual, as well as their professional email address. And then this is super important is don't forget to put what their role was in your development. Were they your chair? Were they a mentor? Were they a fellow faculty? Make sure that you put your relationship to them at the very bottom, and that will give whoever is calling that reference kind of a general idea of questions to ask when looking at reference checks. So I hope that is very helpful. But again, this is very different than on a resume. You'll never put references on a resume, but definitely on a CV. And there's not a particular number. Usually when you are applying to an academic position that needs a CV, they may say, please list, 3, 4, 5, maybe references at the end. 3 is typically the minimum. But I have seen jobs where it's like list 6 references. For certain roles that may be required, especially for upper level administrative roles. But definitely have 3 at a minimum. All right, I'm going to get to the chat in just a few minutes, but I wanted to go over CV formatting really quick, just to give you some ideas of how to set up your page. Word and Google Docs are fine. I would never use a template for making a CV, even if you find a really pretty one online, partially because of all of the hidden code that you simply cannot see that interferes with the style of your CV and also the submission of your CV to applicant tracking systems and different AI platforms. So I would use very, very basic word processing, again, Google Doc or Word Doc. You make your margins as small as you can at 0.5. 0.5 is the smallest I want you to go. Don't go smaller than that, but definitely don't have them at 1 inch. 1 inch is just so large. And you just don't need that much space. So 0.5 to 0.75 is fine. White space on a CV is helpful because, again, we're not trying to cram all of this into a 1 or 2 page resume. We have space to be able to lengthen it a bit. So make sure you have some white space between sections, sometimes between titles, between your header and the next section. Perfectly great and acceptable. Font size, I encourage all of you to have size 10. 11 is fine. It just starts getting a little big at that point. But 10 is what I would use. And then really think about your style. And this is what gets kind of tricky, especially if you've been piecemealing your CVs over the years, making sure that you keep everything consistent throughout the entire document. So for instance, if you are bolding the organization of your degree and all of the places where you've worked, make sure they're bolded all the way through the document consistently. If you've been italicizing the city and state, make sure they're all italicized. So you really just need to fine tune that. If, for instance, you have been putting dashes, your title dash date, then make sure you're using that dash and not a comma, not a colon. Those kinds of things can really trip up the formatting of a CV and just makes it look sloppy. Again, focus on the job role when you're actually organizing the document to submit to a position. Make sure you're tailoring it as much as you can to what they're hiring for. Again, for teaching roles, I want to see teaching on that first page. Research roles, research should be on the first page. Leadership, whatever the case may be. Make sure that that first page really pulls me in as a reader and makes me want to read the following pages. It really, it helps me dive into the content that you're giving me. And again, just remember throughout the entire document, reverse chronological order in each section. So not the whole thing, that would be impossible, but just in each section, the newest items to the oldest items. And then we're going to wrap up here, but remember that the person reading your CV is a little different than typical human resource professionals in the world. Usually, people reading your CV after it goes through, typical AI platforms, they're going to be people in your field. So it's okay to use terminology in your field of study. Okay. You don't want to abbreviate again because a lot of AI is not reading acronyms. So make sure you still spell those things out, but use terminology that you use in your field. The CV reader will understand it and be able to see your expertise based on the language that you're providing them. No full sentences anywhere throughout the document. Again, this is going from more of that classic CV to more of the modern CV. Use those bullet points to really talk about your accomplishments in each of your roles and really help the reader to be able to browse your document very quickly. Our eyes are drawn to bullet points, and that's what is so helpful, is really helping a reader break up your information so it's easily digestible. Make sure with each bullet point you have that power verb, really demonstrating what you accomplished, what did you do, and then that why and the results of whatever that accomplishment was. And then just final editing here. So make sure there are no misspelling in your CV. This is again where I can come in to help you if you want me to take a quick glance at it or read through it for consistency and job application. But definitely make sure there's no misspelling. Most employers will just discount a CV or resume when there are misspelled words. So please make sure you do double, triple, quadruple check all of the proofreading. Appearance, it needs to be easy to read, especially for those of you who have 20 plus pages of a CV. If it's not easy to read, I'm probably not getting past page 3. So make sure it's very easy to read, easy flow, easy to navigate. Again, most relevant experience first, tailored to that job description towards the beginning of the CV. Always keep a positive tone. Never mention negatives throughout a document like this or a cover letter or teaching statements, things like that. Always keep your tone positive. Make sure everything's accurate. I definitely use AI to help me with some verbiage from time to time, but definitely make sure that everything in your CV, if someone were to ask you a question about it, you would be able to honestly and truthfully talk about that particular experience or item on your CV with confidence and that it didn't come from some other source. Again, make sure everything is clear. There's clear language. There's a good flow. It's appropriate for your field. And then finally, don't include personal information. And again, this might be a little bit different, especially for those of you who might be international or might be wanting to move internationally. There are countries that need you to have some of these personal things on a CV or resume. But in the United States, these things are not required. So you don't have to put, height or marital status, or in this case, eye color or a photo. Make sure that you're leaving those things off. All right, so I want you to take a moment and I'm going to check out the chat. But take a minute and think about what are some of the ways that you can strengthen your CV. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm going to get to the question. So I will be sharing the slide deck. I'll send that to all of you this afternoon. Let's see. Michelle, you say, do you suggest naming students we advise when listing our faculty advising? Probably not in that case, Michelle. The reason, for instance, under like a thesis or dissertation, we would want to mention a chair, for instance, or an advisor. We would want to mention you because you are the professional, whereas we probably don't need to mention a student just because they're not well known yet. So I think mentioning the thesis advisor or the chair, it's a little bit of name dropping, and a lot of times, people in authority and leadership, they kind of know each other. So that's more of why we do it. But I wouldn't worry about mentioning a student name just for privacy purposes. Let's see. What if the references are now retired? Good question. You could, I would still put all the information that I showed, the name of the school and the address and all of that, but you'll probably need to put under there, I know it's like emeritus or retired or something like that, and you'll just need to update their email address, their phone number, and you'll also need to update the reference, especially if they've not worked with you recently, kind of what the job is and how they can speak to it professionally, because obviously you want them to provide a really solid recommendation. So it just maybe take a little bit more description in that reference just to let the reader that they are retired and they're not, not currently in that position, but definitely list the position that they were in that the person calling can reference, were they your supervisor, were they your chair, whatever the case may be. Good question. Let's see. Do you have any suggestions for those trying to enter academia the legal field? From those with field experience and have graduated? Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's really helpful, great question. Um, One thing that's super helpful when you're getting into academia from industry is again just you're rephrasing things from more of an industry perspective. So, for instance, in industry, you may talk about how you trained, colleagues on something, but you're going to want to change the language from trained to taught. It's just a slight tweak, but if you're wanting to be in academia to be a faculty member, you're going to have to really talk about how you advised, how you taught, how you researched, how you graded, how you, did all of these different things, how you provided classroom management. But again, you've probably done some of those things in industry, and you just need to translate some of that language into this new terminology of education. But again, I'm happy to help you with that. Let's see here. If you're applying for a position that solely deals with research and development, should we be putting teaching experience? Oh, that's a great question. Um, yeah, that's great. You can put teaching just because sometimes it does go into that. Again, CV is all inclusive. But what I would do in that case is I would put all of your research at the very first. So if I'm helping you set up your CV, we're going to have your education, we're going to have your research experience, we're going to have your publications, we're going to have any grants and things that you've, achieved from that research. Teaching will come much further down the list, if that makes sense. I think it's still valid though, because you just never know when you might need that teaching again. And it doesn't mean that the reviewer will read it or, put teaching into your new job, but it just means it's showcasing additional experience and skill sets. So, no, that's great. But just really think about those first, 2, 3, 4 pages, really showcasing that research experience. Great question. Let's see, ways to improve. Oh, yes, good. Yes, I love this. Eileen, great job. Yes, adding more sections for sure. I don't know what overleaf is, but that's fascinating. I would definitely go to a Google Doc though. Send me what you're using. I'm very curious to know what that is. And let me just reiterate why not templates, okay? And this is very techy. So for those of you who are really good at tech, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But the current applicant tracking systems do not read broken code. Now, me and my non-techiness, that's hard for me to grasp, but I've actually seen it. So I've sat through webinars where professionals in this world will show me what broken code looks like. What happens is let's say you're taking a template from Overleaf in this case, and you're maybe creating several versions of it, or you're copying and pasting, from different documents. What happens is even though you may not see it visually, there's broken code happening within the actual file of the document. And so what happens is when you put that document, even as a PDF, into an applicant tracking system, it cannot read the broken code and basically turns out it looks just like a white piece of paper. And so sometimes it literally just discounts your entire document because it can't read it. When you create something in a Google Doc or a Word doc from scratch, typing everything in or pasting as plain text, that is eliminating some of that code. And so that's going to allow you to have a very clean document with no broken code so that when you either upload it as a document or a PDF into a job portal, the applicant tracking system will be able to read it well. So that's why I say no templates. So, okay, let's see. How to suggest how to avoid redundancy. For instance, the research experience should only go, let's see, in a PhD should only go into research experience, but still could be mentioned. Yes, so no, great question. So yes, it can be mentioned both places. So for instance, my dissertation is mentioned briefly, like the title is mentioned briefly in my education section, but under my research section on my CV, I go into more depth about, again, what was the concept of my research? What was my process? What kind of research? What was I doing? I was doing a qualitative, analysis. And then what was the final result? What did I find from that research? What was the impact? And so you can go a lot more in depth within that research experience than you can in the education. And that's why it's fine to put it in both places. Great question. Oh, let me see if there are any other. Oh, thank you, Eileen. Interesting. I would love to see it. Yes, you're welcome. I know ATSs can be quite tricky. All right, well, that looks like there's all the questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.